So technology addiction, this is probably something that a lot of us come to with some preconceived notions, some strong feelings when whether your experiences with your own kids or seeing other kids or even just kind of walking through the halls at University of Maryland, you might form your own very strong opinions about where technology fits in the lives of young children. And today I hope to give you some clarity and probably also leave you with many more questions than you came in with. So just really quickly, Common Sense Media, where I work, is a nonprofit. We are dedicated to helping kids thrive in a world of media and technology. We were founded over a decade ago to address concerns about the use of technology and media with children. We wanted to provide an independent, curated source of detailed information about media and technology so that families, educators, and kids could make informed decisions about what fits their particular situations, be that at school, home, with different age kids in different settings. We rate and review more than 25,000 media titles so far. That includes independent ratings for everything kids want to watch, read, play, and learn, and that includes movies, TV, apps, games, books, and websites. So if any of you have children at home between the ages of 0 to 18 and you're wondering what's good out there, come check out the website. All of the ratings are basically developed based on an understanding of developmental appropriateness, learning potential, and quality. We also have an arm of Common Sense called Common Sense Education, which has a digital literacy and citizenship program that is available freely to schools that are interested. The Common Sense Education also has a ratings platform for educational technology products that also includes the voices of teachers in describing what does and does not work in the classroom. And lastly, we have what's currently called Common Sense Kids Action, which is Common Sense's advocacy work, which so far has been involved in work to expand early childhood education in California and advocates for policies that protects the online privacy of children. Underneath all of that, we have a robust research program. We study issues surrounding children, media, education, and healthy development. And that includes yearly surveys of children between the ages of 0 to 8, 8 to 18, and parents, tracking media use, attitudes, knowledge, and behavior over time. We also do yearly research briefs that build off of findings in those yearly surveys to engage in other topical areas. Those usually take the forms of annual white papers or research briefs that investigate the role of digital media and technology in supporting children and families' health, development, and learning. The idea is for those reports to review and synthesize the existing research literature, separate facts from fiction, and clearly articulate what we know and don't know about technology in the lives of children and families, which brings me to why I'm here today. This is a controversial topic. You may from time to time come across headlines like these. "It's digital heroin," declared a recent article in the New York Post. A 2015 book review considering 4 books on media and society concluded, "We are hopelessly hooked." There are articles about internet addiction rehabs popping up here in America, particularly in Southeast Asia. Users of the Huffington Post can easily search the site by tags such as smartphone addiction or social media addiction. And one of the latest installments of Time Magazine's You Asked column unpacks the reader question, "Am I addicted to my phone?" The media hype machine is at full blast when talking about our complicated relationships with technology. And maybe it's not surprising. Over the past decade, society has witnessed massive changes in the way that media and technology intersect with the ways we work and live. Devices are more mobile, more functional, and seemingly indispensable. Accordingly, we've integrated media and technology into more and more of our lives, bringing devices with us everywhere and depending on them for a range of work, school, play, and social functions. Recent studies point to the high rates of media and technology access and usage among young people. We actually released a study last November called the Common Sense Census, Media Use by Teens and Tweens, which used a representative survey of American children between the ages of 8 to 12 and teens between the ages of 13 to 18, and documented that outside of school and homework, tweens were spending almost 6 hours a day, and teens were spending almost 9 hours a day using media. That includes watching TV, playing video games, using social media, using the internet, reading, and listening to music. Now, interpreting time spent with media poses a challenge. Some would point to the sheer number of hours as evidence of an addiction. But is that all there is? In this context of high media usage, there is rising concern that children have met or surpassed the cutoff of too much. The word addicted is commonly used to describe people's, and particularly young people's, engagement with media. Yet, it's unclear if all of the addiction talk is indicative of a moral panic that historically accompanies the emergence of new media forms, as when there was much hand-wringing over the introduction of TV, movies, comic books, jazz, or the novel. And interestingly, new technologies such as smartphones and tablets are often used primarily to access traditional media content. So if you look closer at that 9 hours a day that teens spend with media, what's revealed is that the majority of that time is spent watching TVs or videos or listening to music. Now, do we have societal concern over addictions to video or music? Or is it something about how we use new technologies to access media and interact with the world? So, again, with all of this time that children are spending with media, lots of people, researchers, policymakers, and others concerned with children's well-being, we're asking, what are the consequences of this use? Are our kids addicted? Are we addicted? Or are we merely reacting to new social norms? And even if children aren't actually addicted, how should we understand unhealthy engagements with media and their implications? So we kept asking these questions at Common Sense and hearing them again from parents and educators and others. So we decided to take a hard look at the existing research and tap into current family dynamics to find the answers. We wanted to know how an always connected lifestyle affects children's social, emotional, and cognitive development. So this year we did two things. Number one, we initiated a sweeping review of existing research, which we turned into a research report, which I'm going to talk about shortly. And we also did a poll where we polled more than 1,200 parents and teens between the ages of 12 to 18 in the same household to find out how the saturation of cell phones and other mobile devices in family life is playing out in homes and family relationships nationwide. So let me address some of the polling that we did first. Now, the first thing that stood out when we asked this question, we just asked the question straight out, do you feel addicted to your mobile device? So if you look at the numbers here, about 59% of parents felt that their teens were addicted to their mobile devices, and 27% of parents felt that they personally were addicted to their mobile devices. Teens said that 50% felt that they were addicted to their mobile devices, and 28% felt that their parents were addicted to their mobile devices. One thing that stands out there, too, to me, is how comparable, actually, those numbers are. They actually seem to be in pretty good agreement. Now, this does not mean that they actually have some diagnosis of addiction. Rather, they just feel like they are addicted. And like I said, there's pretty good agreement looking at this. Regardless of what it's called, families need to know when and why technology use is problematic. Okay, how else are families feeling about phones in their lives? There's clearly a sense that phones convey urgency. And in fact, if you look at this, 72% of teens said that they felt the need to immediately respond to texts, social networking messages, and other notifications. 48% of parents felt the same. And I think even right now, if you all felt that little buzz in your pocket, many of you and me would probably find it very difficult to resist just pulling it out to quickly check and a little sneak peek at what little buzz had attracted your attention, and perhaps dashing off a quick reply. So there's pressure to respond. It may not surprise you to know that parents aren't particularly over the moon about this, and in fact, 66% of parents felt that their teens were spending too much time on their mobile devices. 52% of kids were agreeing. Again, I actually think that's pretty impressive that a full half of kids think that they are spending too much time on their devices, and I think it's very revealing of some of the internal struggles that we put on ourselves when we think about the use of technology in our lives. Other issues that go along with problematic use or just general use, it's often distracting and can contribute to feelings of being ignored or causing tension in the home. So in our poll, 77% of parents felt that their teens got distracted by devices and don't pay attention when they are together. How many of you have teenagers that are nodding? Some people. 41% of teens felt their parents got distracted by devices and don't pay attention when they were together. And then when you look over here, it says about arguments, about a third of parents and teens say that they're arguing on a daily basis about device use, which I think is actually quite a good bit. But I'm also very curious to know what's going on with the 21 and 30% of parents who say they never argue about it. I'm impressed, I guess, because they've either figured it all out or maybe they've kind of thrown up their hands and said that, I'm just not going to deal with it. But something interesting, and there's certainly like we don't all react to the integration of technology in the same way. But when you get to a question of relationships, that is, how is phone use affecting parents and children's relationships? Do they feel that it's causing damage to the relationships? The answer is, not really, right? 85% of parents felt that their teens' use of mobile devices had made no difference or it even helped the relationship. 89% of parents said the same thing. So how do we reconcile these two things? Is it a source of tension, but kind of a low simmering tension that doesn't reach the high levels of other conflicts that might arise? Are we in denial about how much devices are affecting our relationships? Maybe teens have just never known any other kind of way of life, so they're just fine with how things are going. To sum this up, and to preview what's to come, it's complicated. We have mixed feelings about the role of devices in our family life, but it's unclear to me how serious it is. So what does the other research say about problematic media use or technology addiction? How can we better understand the role of tech in our lives? In May, we released this research brief, Technology Addiction, Concern, Controversy, and Finding Balance. And in this brief, we reviewed over 180 journal articles, press articles, interviews, industry papers, and books. The literature search that we did covered several primary areas: behavioral and technological addiction, media use habits, such as time spent with and frequency with engaging with media, family approaches to media management, prevalence of and attitudes toward media multitasking, and then developmental implications of media use, particularly with respect to empathy and social well-being. So I'm going to go through and pull out some of the key findings and talk about some of the research that influenced our thoughts on this. Number one, internet addiction is potentially serious and needs clarification and additional study to understand the impact on children's physical, cognitive, social, and emotional development. I mentioned earlier that we don't know whether the teens in our poll were actually addicted. And what we found in doing a research paper around this topic is that technology addiction, which is sometimes called internet addiction, is pretty controversial. When we talk about internet addiction, we're talking about a range of excessive and compulsive technology-related behaviors that result in significant negative outcomes. So things like withdrawing from other activities, very serious problems keeping up with schoolwork, feeling really restless or sad or angry when you're trying to cut down or stop on your usage of certain kinds of media. However, there are a lot of definitions of internet addiction out there, and there are lots of different ways to measure it currently. There remains substantial disagreement in the research community about whether internet addiction is a new psychological disorder or rather a manifestation of another disorder, how it's measured, and how prevalent it is. There's also some ambiguity about what internet addiction is, given the many different things that can be done on the internet, such as watching videos, or playing games, or using social media. Focusing only on the amount of time online is controversial, given that children and adults alike are connected most or all the time, and given how many activities take place in online environments. In fact, one large review of studies in 2011 on American adolescents and college students reported a range of internet addiction prevalence estimates of somewhere between 0% and 26%. So there's a pretty good range of disagreement in terms of how prevalent it is. There's also ongoing controversy about whether internet addiction can be considered an addiction in the same sense as substance abuse or a behavioral disorder. Typically, those disorders are distinguished by individuals pathologically seeking out rewarding stimuli, right, despite negative consequences. That's very classic hallmarks of addiction. Internet addiction is not currently included as a diagnosis in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manuals of Mental Disorders, which is the medical resource that classifies and provides diagnostic criteria for mental disorders. So it's difficult to conclude with certainty whether internet addiction is an addiction in the same way that we understand and classify other addictions. However, even if some believe that internet addiction is not the right terminology or it's misleading, there does seem to be at least one area of internet addiction where evidence suggests that there are especially problematic behaviors and outcomes. There's something that is called internet gaming disorder, or IGD, which recognizes unhealthy patterns of engagement with games, and that's been labeled as a condition of interest by the American Psychiatric Association. This is something that's mostly observed in male adolescents and young adults, and it's currently identified as a condition warranting more research in the DSM. So to understand why the APA labeled this particular form of media addiction as internet gaming disorder, as opposed to calling it internet addiction or technology addiction or something similar, consider the research. Scholars reviewed numerous studies on excessive and problematic media use. These studies used many instruments to measure and diagnose participants' media-related conditions, and many of them looked specifically at internet addiction. However, participation in internet gaming was largely responsible for explaining internet addiction. In other words, it was the part that was particularly problematic. Now, the APA did not rule out the possibility of other media and technological addictions, but it could not justify defining generalized internet addiction. So instead, they identified internet gaming disorder as a condition warranting more research. Individuals with internet gaming disorder experience what we would consider extreme negative consequences as a result of their gameplay. So when I say extreme, I'm not just talking about a kid who likes to play games a lot. You know, they have fun, they're playing a couple hours a day. I'm talking about kids who, as a result of their gameplay, are really suffering exhaustion, loss of relationships, they've stopped going to school, they're kind of parked in the front of a computer, or they're gaming for like 15 hours a day. There's also evidence that brains of internet gaming disorder patients resemble the brains of substance users and pathological gamblers. But you continue to look at the research, and it becomes apparent that cultural differences may underlie the differences in internet gaming disorder prevalence across countries. So consider that the children of parents who do not approve of their gaming habits may go out of their way to hide their gaming to avoid punishment, right? In this case, deception, which is a frequent characteristic of other kinds of behavioral disorders, could relate more to the fact that parents do not support gaming rather than to a particular problem with a player. A loss of interest in other activities, another characteristic of a disorder, implies that time spent on gaming results in less time being social with friends, but makes the assumption that meeting friends online is less valuable than meeting them in real life, even though much research points to the value of online social interactions and community building. But for now, it remains an intriguing area for additional research. So even though it's unclear whether or how teens are addicted to the internet, problematic media use is a concern, right? It's still a way to describe dysfunctional ways of engaging with media and devices, such as smartphones, in ways that could be characterized as compulsive, obsessive, or otherwise unhealthy. But there are substantial gaps in research on problematic media use, especially as it pertains to children. Part of the concern around being constantly connected through technology and media revolves around how we multitask among different forms of media and between media and real life. Media multitasking is very common among children and adults, even though there's ongoing concern over how it affects our abilities to pay attention and avoid distraction. There are generally 3 forms of media multitasking that are identified. One is within medium, and that's if I'm kind of doing 2 different things on my computer or 2 different things simultaneously on my phone. If I'm going back and forth between Facebook and Twitter, for example, that would be within one medium. Between medium would be if I'm trying to do this while I'm also watching TV, so I'm going between 2 different medium. Or between mediums and humans. So if I'm sitting down with you at dinner and we're having a conversation and I take out my phone to take a picture of my food while we are talking, that would be an example of multitasking between device and medium. A 2010 study of 8 to 18-year-olds found that young people were engaging in media multitasking for about 29% of their overall media use. They were fitting in over 10 hours of media use into 7.5 hours of their day. That was 2010. We haven't had a study like that since. You might imagine, given the proliferation of smaller portable devices, that number may have gone up. Another study of 263 middle school, high school, and university students found that students studied for fewer than 6 minutes before switching to another technological distraction, such as texting or social media. Now, some regard multitasking as a fact of life in the 21st century, and perhaps even as a valuable skill for juggling multiple demands in fast-paced environments. Research has even pointed to video games as a tool for improving multitasking skills. But even if it's possible, it may not be desirable. Many question whether it is actually possible to do two things at once. So consider a teen who texts or posts on social media while doing homework. Research suggests that she isn't actually doing two things at the same time, she's doing two things back-to-back sequentially. If she switches rapidly between tasks, then it might seem to others and to herself that she is doing multiple tasks at once, but in actuality, these switches require shifting cognitive resources or diverting your attention from one task to another. Some young people don't believe that media multitasking is harming their ability to get things done. For example, our own common sense study of teens found that high percentages of teens, over half, watched TV, used social media, and texted while doing homework. But most of the teens did not feel like multitasking harmed the quality of their work. However, multitasking may decrease productivity because users take time to reorient after a transition to a different activity, and they become cognitively fatigued from the effort, which slows the rate of work. Additionally, multitasking makes it more difficult to create memories that can be accurately retrieved later. So for anybody out there who is answering messages while I'm giving this conversation, you're going to have a trickier time remembering what I said. Consider a study of laptop users in university classrooms, which found that students who multitasked on a laptop during a lecture performed worse on a test than students who were not multitasking. Maybe that's not so surprising, except for the fact that laptops are pretty much a staple and a given in classrooms. Some might expect that a generation born into a world of digital devices may have more experience multitasking and thus be better at it. But research does not bear this out. A seminal research study involving 262 college students found that heavy media multitaskers have a harder time filtering out irrelevant information. The researchers who did the study suggested that the heavy media multitaskers had a harder, no, I just said that. In other words, they may have developed a habit of treating all information that they came across with equal attention instead of allotting steady attention to a particular task. Of course, it is also possible that those media multitaskers have other attention issues that result in poor performance. Additional research with younger populations, that study was done with college students, is needed to illuminate the impacts of low, medium, and high levels of media multitasking on developing children. Point number 3, problematic media use may be related to lower empathy and social well-being. I'm going to use the word may. That's why I'm going to give some caveat and wiggle room for myself. It's unlikely that researchers 2 decades ago could have predicted the multiple ways in which people would use personal technology and media to regularly curate and give glimpses into their lives. But this shift has occurred. A 2013 study collected responses from over 12,000 individuals in 24 countries, asking people to respond to the prompt, describe how much you share online, including status updates, feelings, photos, videos, links, etc. Nearly 1/4, or 24% of global users replied, everything or most things. Now, does the frequent sharing of personal feelings, thoughts, images, etc., does that impact empathy? That is, the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, or our perspective-taking abilities, the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes, the ability to feel what another person is feeling. Many researchers have noted that narcissism seems to be increasing, while empathic traits have been on the decline, and have pointed to social media as a driver for that change. Now, there are several possible suggestions for why social media use might be related to lower empathy. First, interacting with others through screens leave out many social cues that humans receive in person. For example, a teen who receives a text from a friend about his or her day will miss out on visual cues, right? Eye contact, facial expressions. They miss out on auditory cues like tone of voice, and tactile cues like touch. Empathy may develop in the context of the many cues that we get during face-to-face communication. Now, to the extent that media replaces face-to-face interactions, perhaps we should be concerned. Additionally, online environments that allow anonymity may make it easier for individuals to ignore others' feelings and thus be more aggressive or insensitive than they would be in person. Anybody who's been following discussion about politics online in the last year surely knows what I am talking about. But when it comes to evidence linking social media use to empathy, the results are actually fairly limited and difficult to interpret. So one study of adults between the ages of 18 to 50 found that commenting, viewing photos, and posting status updates on Facebook was related to levels of narcissism, but that higher levels of chatting on Facebook were positively related to perspective taking, another key component of empathy. So the type of online activity may matter quite a lot. Interestingly, another study of over 1,700 adults found that going online frequently did not have any impact on face-to-face communication and did not reduce empathy. It's possible that social media causes teens to be more narcissistic, but it's equally likely that narcissistic individuals are more likely to use sites that allow them to talk about and promote themselves. Well, what about stress? A key component, certainly in my well-being. There's a so-called fear of missing out, or FOMO, as sometimes it's better known as. Kids becoming glued to their online activities because they're afraid that they're going to miss something. Not being in the know leads to a feeling of anxiety. So, teens are constantly, not just teens, every one of us, may be constantly checking online to see if something is happening or not. And there's some limited evidence that this is true, although the severity is still unclear. In a survey of over 1,800 adults, frequent internet and social media users were not found to have higher levels of stress. And in fact, women in particular who use social media reported lower levels of stress. The primary way that social media use was linked to stress was through higher levels of awareness of stressful events in other people's lives. Social media use has also been linked to higher incidences of depression. A study of adults found evidence that people felt depressed after spending long periods of time on Facebook because they were socially comparing themselves to others and felt badly about themselves as a result. If you are constantly seeing others' best moments, you can easily begin to negatively compare your own life and yourself to what you see online. Comparison thoughts such as, everyone else has it so together, or why don't I do any of these great things? These things can affect internal self-esteem. So in other words, in this research, viewing posts that make others seem more attractive or as though they were having more enjoyable experiences did make the user experience more depressive symptoms. So again, the research leaves us with more complications, more questions necessarily than definitive answers. Now, it should be noted that if you ask teens themselves, and you should ask teens and talk to kids when you ask them about their technology use, that they still place very high value on face-to-face communication. And they don't see social networking as harming their personal relationships. We did a study in 2012 that found that teens preferred face-to-face communication over all technological means of communication because it was perceived to be more fun and because they could understand people better in person. In addition, over half of teen social media users felt that social networking had mainly helped their relationships with friends, as compared to 4% who felt that it hurt their relationships. Excuse me. Again, because so much of this work is correlational, current research makes it difficult to know whether people who engage in problematic media use become less empathetic, whether people with less empathy or low levels of social well-being choose to engage more online, or both. Point number 5, technology may facilitate new ways of expressing common adolescent developmental needs, such as the need for connection and validation from peer groups. Some would argue that everything I've mentioned above, that I mentioned so far, is indicative of problematic media use, especially for a selfie-obsessed teen. But it could also indicate the many roles that phones play in modern life, including taking and sharing pictures and videos, playing videos, music, and games, exchanging messages with others, accessing social networks, emailing, and making purchases. We should note that many of the behaviors exhibited by teens are expressions of developmental needs that had existed long before the internet. For example, teens' need to be connected to others, to be liked and validated, are hallmarks of adolescence. The importance of peer relations increases because peers give feedback about individuals and the world outside of what is received from the family. What's different about teens' experiences in the digital age is the extent to which technology can narrow or expand the ways in which teens interact with their friends and the wider world. engaging with peers on social networks such as Facebook, Instagram, or Snapchat, or playing immersive role-playing online games with friends and people from around the world are ways in which youth may feel socially connected. In this framing, the seemingly constant use of tech, evidenced by teens immediately responding to text, to social networking posts, and other notifications, is actually more a reflection of teens' need to connect with others. So what looks like excessive use and distraction is actually a reflection of new ways of maintaining peer relations and engaging in communities that are relevant to them. The researcher Dana Boyd even notes that teens aren't necessarily addicted to technology, they're really addicted to each other. So where does that leave us? First, let me throw on my cautious researcher hat for a moment to give a reminder. It's important to note that much of the research I mentioned was conducted with college students and adult populations, not specifically with children. There is some limited work on adolescents, but very little on young children or preteens. And given the many physical, cognitive, social, and emotional changes that occur from early childhood through adolescence and beyond, I think it's appropriate to treat findings with caution, as research on adults may not always generalize to younger populations. It's also worth noting that much of the research to date is correlational, making it difficult to know whether problematic media use is actually causing negative outcomes. So there's a way to go in terms of understanding the prevalence and scope of the issue. But let's take a moment to evaluate our own attitudes on the subject, as many of us come to the discussion with our own opinions and biases. So look at this photo of phone-wielding teens that recently went viral. Has anyone seen this picture before? Okay. How does it make you feel about the state of technology in our kids' lives? Go ahead, just throw out some words. Sad. What was that? Happy. Researching the painting. All right, good. You guys, I kind of trained you guys to think about this pretty critically. Yes? Well, we didn't get to text next in this one. I don't have any data to present about that, but that is a concern as well. I think a sense of panic is surely pervasive for a lot of people who look at this picture. So these kids are sitting in Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum, and they appear oblivious to the presence of that Rembrandt masterpiece. But as you guessed, for any of you who've seen an M. Night Shyamalan movie, there's a twist here, which is that these kids are not Snapchatting or checking their Instagram feeds. They are reading about the painting. Which brings us back to one of the cruxes of this issue. Much of the discussion of technology addiction implicitly assumes that both media and kids are monoliths. But different kids use tech differently for different purposes in different contexts. So where does that leave us? You could have two people who spend identical amounts of time online. One person's use is problematic and the other's is not. And a lot of that really depends on the potentially positive or negative outcomes that are occurring as a result of that use. You could have a kid who's really into online gaming, spending 12 to 15 hours a day on it with lots of other negative factors co-occurring. Grades are going down. He's not socializing. He gets upset when play is restricted or cut off. Right? You might be able to make a case that this kid has some truly problematic use, and there might be some kind of addictive features here. You could have another kid who's spending 12 to 15 hours a day on the internet, who's doing just fine. Schoolwork is good. He's still really social. In fact, this kid uses games as a conduit to talk to other people with whom he interacts in real life. It's just an additional way of making a social connection, and it's part of his healthy, integrated identity. How do we know? As I mentioned earlier, there's no hard diagnosis yet, but if I was trying to figure out whether somebody's media use is problematic or even addicting, I'd want to know the answer to some basic questions, right? Is the kid doing their schoolwork? Are they sleeping okay? Do they seem to have good social connections? Are they participating in other activities? Do they seem depressed, lonely, or exhibiting other kinds of negative outcomes? I think it's helpful to check off a lot of these other boxes to establish a baseline of where technology fits into a kid's life. And it's also important to tease out how a kid actually feels about their own online use. Is it causing them agitation or anxiety? Do they feel like they can get away from it and still feel okay? If they seem fine otherwise, perhaps their use of screens is not as much of a concern as we might think. So, perhaps unsurprisingly, my takeaway from the research is that there's undoubtedly a lot of media hype and a lot of alarmists out there. And there are areas for concern. So, what do we do? The last point of the technology addiction paper was that embracing a balanced approach to media and technology and supporting adult role modeling is recommended to help prevent problematic media use. So what's part of a balanced approach? It might be something like fostering awareness of media and yourself, right? So what are your own media habits? Reflecting on how you want to spend your time and identifying whether that time use is in line with your values. Number 2, embracing quality media usage. There's a difference between spending hours using technology to create digital worlds, hone photography or music skills, or engage in meaningful discussions of important issues, or being a passive consumer of content, or using tech as a way to distance yourself from social relationships. A healthy digital lifestyle could and should include thoughtful and intentional uses of technology. Many youth may lack the means to spend as much face-to-face time with their friends as they would desire or even need. And in fact, I've heard it argued that one of the reasons that media usage is so high is that we've limited the number of spaces that children can go in public by themselves outside of the adult world. They may lack access to public transit, cars, or the money to pay for fares or gasoline. They may lack time due to after-school activities, homework, or household chores. In all of these cases, media can solve a problem. They help youth connect to one another and bridge distance and time. Number 3, selective single tasking. So, for example, to decrease interruptions in your day-to-day lives, people can adjust the settings on their phones and computers to prohibit push notifications, all the pop-ups and sounds and vibrations that signal some amount of news has happened. And even if you do choose to keep these notifications on, people can assign discrete sounds to various types of correspondence. You might have a chime to alert you to an incoming text from a friend. Some other kind of buzz might alert you to a Instagram-like. But people can decide whether to check their phones based on the type of sound instead of responding to every alert. Or people can opt to put their phone away when you're doing homework and just focus on that one thing, or say, put your phone away while you're preparing a talk for a conference, hypothetically. Point number 4, carving out times and places to disconnect. Users of media and technology can establish media-free times. That might be meal times, might be an hour before bedtime. I've seen recent research that indicates that blue light in phones can disrupt sleep, so maybe you want to not use your phone so much right before bedtime. Maybe creating some zones, maybe keep tech out of the bedroom, or maybe no tech on a car ride, to try to restore some balance, as well as to support face-to-face conversations, healthy sleep, and safe driving. Some users might find that an extended period of unplugging is useful. Some people, I've heard the term digital detox thrown around. Maybe if that fits for you, so be it. You might have a regular, modest period of time. For example, a digital Sabbath, consisting of one weekend day that limits or eliminates media use. Future research should examine the effectiveness of selectively unplugging and whether and how children can prevent or mitigate negative outcomes with more intentional usage. For all the things I've just listed, there's almost no research yet to determine how effective these things are. Lastly, it's important to nurture relationships and face-to-face conversation. Engagement with face-to-face conversation is also a feature of balanced media use. This not only ensures that screen time is less than 24/7, but it also supports the cultivation and maintenance of meaningful relationships and opportunities for conversation. And lastly, parents and other caring adults can help youth to manage media. By modeling balanced media habits themselves, as well as co-engaging with media. When I say co-engaging, I mean talking to your kids about the things that interest them, that they're doing online, who they're talking to, what they're doing. Discussing best practices with your kids, ethical dilemmas, like what happens if somebody gets cyberbullied or you observe something. Having those conversations. Setting limits around how, when, and where to use media. In all of these ways, parents can act as media mentors. One recent study suggests that children of what they so-called technology limiters, who focus almost exclusively on minimizing children's use of technology, that those kids are more likely to engage in problematic behaviors, such as posting hostile comments or impersonating others online, whereas children of media mentors are much less likely to engage in those kinds of problematic online behaviors. So understanding that adults in children's lives are role models, parents should be conscious of how they engage with technology and media, given how they want their children to engage with technology and media. If children observe parents being frequently distracted by their phones, they may be more apt to internalize that behavior. Modeling sets an example and establishes a social norm. Finding balance does not mean eliminating media use. It doesn't even necessarily mean reducing media use. Balance is about respecting quality of life, online and off. Thank you.
much. Very interesting results. Questions? Lots of hands. Let's just start on this. Let's see. Yeah, you've got it.
Hi, thank you for sharing your research. I work in technology, so this was particularly interesting for me. I'm wondering what the right age is to introduce technology to kids, and what is the right age to introduce social media and other ways of connecting with people online to kids based on your research?
Great question. The first question about the right age to introduce technology has a big it depends, because technology can mean a lot of different things, right? So you have TV, you have apps, you have Skype or FaceTime. You have lots of different ways that media and technology can be used. There is a limited body of research on children between the ages of 0 to 2 and 0 to 3 that suggests that children that young have a really difficult time learning from screen media. But that's not to say that they're necessarily harmed by using screen media. What I would say is that the context of use is probably more important, especially for younger children, in the sense that if you sit down, and I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, so I will use personal anecdotal experience here. If you sit down with a 1-year-old with an iPad in your lap and you go through, kind of a simple BusyBox kind of an app or like an ebook or something like that, that kind of a interaction, where a kid is like close to you and you have both joint attention on something and you're labeling something, it's not that different in a lot of ways than reading a book. Now I'm certainly not saying to stop reading books. You should absolutely do both. But that both can be part of a healthy digital lifestyle. I would say to the extent that media use displaces interaction with the real world, like a lot of interaction with the real world for a young kid that age, for whom interaction with other people, with other humans and with the things in their environment are kind of the most critical parts of their learning, right? If you have a lot of technology that's displacing that, that's an issue. So I mentioned, not to plug, but like Common Sense Media has a ratings and review portion of the site where you can look up what age is appropriate for certain kinds of media, and that's based on what we know from the research about what kids can handle and learn in regards to a range of different dimensions. So, violence, consumerism, language, positive role models. We rate on a whole range of different kinds of issues. So look for something that is a good match for your kid's particular age. I saw a lot of people when Star Wars came out were so eager to show their like 5- and 6-year-olds like the original Star Wars trilogy. I too am looking forward to sharing that with my kids. But at this point, they're just too young. They're just too young. But again, that is a personal family decision. So, the other question about social media, right now that's partially regulated by law in terms of what companies can and can't do in terms of collecting information from children. So, often I think the age is 13 to be a Facebook user, or 14. And a lot of them have about that same age. I think it's really good to depend on how much you know about that kid and how responsible you feel like they might be. I think I would say the average age at which children get a social media account is somewhere between 12 and 13.
What about phones?
I don't know the actual age at which they get a phone. I think it might be a year or two younger than that, but I don't remember offhand. Thank you.
Yes, so I had a question about the role of trends in the use of social media. So 3 years ago, we had the ALS Icebreaker Challenge, and then 2 years ago, it was the LGBTQ crisis, where everyone was changing their profile pictures, and then we had Pokemon Go this summer. So how do you think these trends are attaching the teens to their phones, and do you think that these trends are created on purpose to keep the kids on their phones in the summer? Because in the summer there is no school, there is no work, there is nothing that you can go on to look up. So maybe is that accident that it happens during the summer, or is that intentionally?
I can probably, it's a good question. I can probably only speak from my personal observations and less from the data or research on this, because I don't know for sure whether those kinds of campaigns are meant to like draw people in during the summertime, or how much they're, certainly like the companies that put them out, companies or nonprofits that put them out, yeah, they want them to go viral. I mean, they are very specifically designed to make you reach out to your friends and extend that, so that usually, in this case, it's to raise money for a good cause, right? And teens and others may feel like this is something that I can do, that I can participate in. There's certainly controversy over how effective it is, or whether it's kind of a, it seems like a form of helping out where maybe there are other better ways of helping out. But in the terms of kids wanting to feel like they are making a difference and wanting to belong, I think there is quite a strong pull of those kinds of campaigns in, when kids come across them and when they get passed around their social networks.
Let's call on someone over here, and then we'll come back to you. Yes.
Hi, Daphne.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Michael, for such a balanced presentation of a complicated topic. The question I wanted to ask you has to do with the beginning of your presentation, when you showed the results of the survey, where the kids themselves, 50% of them, if I'm not mistaken, admitted, I think that was the word you used, that they're addicted to mobile media. The point I want to ask you about is whether we know, or whether you know in that survey, what do they mean by the word addicted? Because I think we as adults use addicted and we think negatively, like addicted to drugs, but kids often use addicted positively. They brag that they're addicted to the phone because it means they're cool, that they're chronological, they respond immediately, you can reach them anytime. I mean, they brag about being addicted, quote unquote. Yeah. And it's a very different meaning than what we as adults think is addicted.
Great question, and one that I've heard also from others who looked at that poll as well. The answer is no, we did not tell them, we did not give them a definition of addicted. So it is certainly just as possible that a teen or a parent says, oh, I'm so addicted to my phone, like I love it, I can't, without having a real serious thought about how negative it is, which is why we asked a lot of follow-up questions that are not related to that word, in terms of, do you feel like you spend too much online? How do you feel like it's affecting your relationships? Is it causing conflict? So I would not use that word in that poll, except in as much as it is a way that parents and teens describe themselves. How positive or negative that is a little bit hard to say, but certainly as a descriptor for their own use, they like to use it. And the other stats that I presented are more along the lines of like what they are actually what their actual experiences in their kind of day-to-day family life. Does that help? It's a good question.
Over here.
Thank you. I'm interested in your website. Three things. One, the incredible content that, or the incredible technology that brings to people with disabilities. Myself being one of them, it's changed my life. The ability to be able to utilize this technology and be able to read and write and express myself is amazing. However, society hasn't figured that out yet, and so it's looked at as a crutch instead of a real tool. And the content is important. Also, the bullying. You kind of briefly talked about it, but that's one of the biggest areas for children, and bullying has been with the technology, and I hope we can come to some kind of change in that area, or at least help with that, because bullying's been around a long time, but it's it hasn't. And then the people that are economically that don't have the access to this technology, where is that divide as well?
So, I'm sorry, what was the question?
The people who may not have access to technology from an economic standpoint, some students may not have access to some of this technology to be able to utilize.
So the question is about the digital divide and its impact? Yeah, I mean, so what research has been showing is that in some ways the digital divide is closing in terms of access, right? That people have more or less, there's more internet access for more people, certainly than there used to be 10 years ago. More people have access to smartphones and even tablets than they used to. There's still a gap. There's still a significant gap between those two, but they're closing. But it is also true that there's a gap in terms of like how good and supported those technologies are, right? So that if I am in a more affluent home, I am more likely to have a stable internet connection. I am more likely to access that internet connection on a computer on which I can work. If I am in a lower income home, I'm less likely to have a laptop. And my if my Wi-Fi or whatever is spottier, I'm less likely to have the resources to be able to fix it, whatever. So there's other kinds of gaps that are still just as prevalent. And you have to worry, I mean, I do worry about, kids who have access to certain kinds of technology that enable them to do their schoolwork in better ways, more efficient ways, in ways that utilize the internet, in ways that kids who either can't do it unless they have to go someplace else, to the library or to wherever. And those places are great places to do it, but there are more barriers for those kids. But I think, I do share those concerns that, those digital equity gaps are things that really do continue to be addressed.
Earlier today, there was, discussions about consumerism among the teens. And, although I have to say the other day, my teenager asked me, Mom, what's the capital of Bahrain? I'm like, I don't know. He looked it up within seconds and he told me where it was. And I'm using technology here to refer to my question. Facebook uses, stores and uses 2.5 million pieces of content on a daily basis. So from the emails that are, the exchanges on Facebook. And they definitely use these to target ads on individuals who are using this. So has your research done any work on how these ads are affecting our youth, especially on consumerism, and how this is contributing to this consumer culture among the young?
So there are laws in place that are supposed to prevent companies from collecting certain kinds of information from kids, especially without parental permission. Some companies are better at this than others. If you're a Facebook user, you're supposed to be of a certain age, although it's true that there are people who are younger who use those sites. In terms of kind of online advertising influence, I think it's a great area for more research. There's certainly been lots of research about advertising, primarily on television and in print. That children at younger ages certainly have a much more difficult time being able to distinguish between what's an ad and what's somebody trying to persuade you to buy something versus what's just content. And if you look at apps like YouTube Kids, if anyone has seen YouTube Kids, or just YouTube in general, it's very hard to distinguish, for not just kids, teens and myself, what is an ad and what's not, right? There are these hugely popular videos of kids playing with toys. I actually think the most popular YouTube channel in the world, gets billions and billions of views, is a 5, 6, or 7-year-old who plays with toys. Like he gets toys and he plays with them and reviews them, right? Now, is that just user-generated content that kids sharing his love? He's getting those toys. I mean, companies, I'm sure, falling over themselves to send this most watched kid their toy to play with on on his channel. So is that an ad or is it just user-generated content? There's not a really good set of definitions right now, and I think the field would really benefit from some clarity and probably some regulation about what kids should and should not be exposed to. Right now, it's all very commingled. In the TV world, they've made very clear over the years, there's an act break where you can definitively tell where the commercial starts and when it ends. There's certain ways that they have to make advertisements to make it clear that what toys can and can't do, right? Those things don't exist for the internet, and it's kind of like a Wild West out there in terms of ads on the internet. Good question.
Okay. There was a hand on, yes.
I wonder if your organization has done any research into what happens when parents use these tracking tools to track what their kids are doing online. Does it help? Does it just hurt the relationship? I mean, what's the impact, if you know?
I'm not aware of any research that shows how effective it is in terms of long-term behavior. I know as a parent media management strategy, it is a tool that some parents use. And it's interesting, in other work that we've been doing, it's just interesting how, kind of no matter what your level of digital savvy, how parents try to be involved in their kids' digital lives. So for some, they can set up really technical ways to monitor. There's apps, there's, you can shut off the Wi-Fi at a certain time of day or install internet filters, stuff that requires some knowledge and complication. We did a case study with a mother who was not as digitally savvy, who didn't know quite exactly how to manage what she thought was her daughter's excessive phone usage. So she just called the phone company and asked them to shut it off. And that was her way of managing it because she didn't know how to install filters or whatever. So there's kind of those kind of external ways where they impose ways to just restrict flat out. And there are lots of other ways of managing media use that involve, negotiating with kids around when it is and is not acceptable to use media, whether parents have a right to see, kind of spot check their kids' phones. I don't have a definitive answer on what is the exact right way. A lot of it depends on kind of personal parental value.
Let me just mention 4 issues that I would like you to talk about as quickly as you can.
Let me make some notes here. Go ahead.
Okay, the first one is context. You mentioned briefly that kids have fewer opportunities for casual interaction with each other outside of parental oversight, and that would seem to have a huge impact on the use of new media. Secondly, the developmental impact. You said that there wasn't a lot of research on younger kids, but I think all of us sort of assume that it has developmental impact when kids are using this so early. Brain development, social development, whether it contributes to a kind of, and I use the words with great caution, autistic and distractible behavior. Media tends to be all absorbing in a way other kinds of media were not. Third issue is the medium is the message. That is, when we read on a cell phone, we scan, we don't read. I mean, that's just, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that. Does that have effects outside of that domain? And then finally, just the issue of trade-offs. Everything is good and bad. And it's, our challenge is to figure out how the trade-offs work.
Is there a specific question you would like me to answer?
Well,
first?
That's just, sort of how you would come down on the trade-offs.
So, okay, so you're right. Everything has a trade-off. I think it's a matter of the value of what you are displacing if you are displacing something. So if you are a child in a impoverished neighborhood who does not have access to a lot of other resources, your internet use might actually enable you to have lots of access to stuff that you wouldn't have access to. That trade-off might actually be quite good. So increased media usage in some contexts and some environments might actually be more beneficial. If you are using media to the exclusion of lots of other things, right? Like if you used to be used to play soccer, for example, used to be like very physically active, and then you got really into video games so much that you dropped out of your team and you seem kind of withdrawn and you're just really into it, and maybe you seem like depressed, loneliness, whatever it is. That trade-off that you made probably wasn't a good trade-off. So, when I talk about finding balance, I think it's related to this issue about what is the trade-off that you're willing to make based on your own self-assessment of kind of what your values are, and what feels like the right amount of screen time or screen usage for you. For young children, I think I just mentioned, human interaction is the #1 most important thing in kids learning. So if your screen use is diminishing the quality and the quantity of interactions with other humans, that's not a good trade-off. In terms of the questions about brain development and social development, I think you mentioned like the development of autistic traits. I don't know of any research that suggests that media use either causes autism. I do know that, okay. So this is where correlational research struggles, right? Because it's hard to know which came first. Is it that the media is driving people to act in a certain way, or is it that kids who are already kind of predisposed to certain ways of behaving, attention problems or otherwise, prefer to use media? Or maybe there's just a cycle. Maybe those two things kind of feed on each other. It's probably some combination of both. But it's really hard to tell without longitudinal research, and there's a paucity of longitudinal research at this point. People talk a lot about brain development. I mentioned like there's some indication that the brains of technology addicts are different in some ways, that, gray areas, I don't remember exactly. I'm not going to quote it because I'm going to get it wrong. But that the brains are somehow structurally different. But again, they don't know if those people are, because of the way their brains are, choose their media environments versus the media environments affecting their brains. Everything has an impact developmentally. There's always going to be a trade-off. I do recommend, that the content, what you actually pick, and the context of that usage, in your life, in your pure life, in your family life, whatever, matters much more than the amount of time than somebody is spending on a particular piece of media.